My HOA tried to take 400 acres with one piece of paper. Then the sheriff got suspicious. I came home at 6:07 that morning, expecting nothing more than a quiet day on my Wyoming ranch. Instead, I found my fence torn down, survey stakes across my pasture, black SUVs beside my barn, and a sold sign bolted to the gate my father built. The HOA president handed me a recorded deed with my name on it and calmly told me my 2,400 acres were no longer mine. I knew the signature was fake, but I had no idea how they got that lie into the county records. And what the sheriff discovered next changed everything. If you want to see how this unfolds, stay with me, and subscribe if you enjoy stories where evidence speaks louder than intimidation. At 6:07 that morning, I came home and found a sold sign bolted to the gate my father built. Not hanging from it, bolted through it, sold, future site of Cedar Ridge West. Behind the gate, my eastern fence had been pulled down. Orange survey stakes ran through the pasture in a straight line toward my equipment barn. 3 black SUVs sat on my gravel road, and 2 survey crews were already measuring land where my cattle had grazed for years. I had been away less than 2 days. Somehow, while I was gone, somebody had sold my 2,400-acre Wyoming ranch. I stopped my pickup 50 feet from the gate and killed the engine. A woman stepped away from the lead SUV. Vanessa Whitmore, president of Cedar Ridge Estates, the subdivision bordering the eastern edge of Dawson Creek Ranch. She wore a dark coat and carried a leather document folder like she'd come to close a business deal. "Morning, Caleb." I looked past her at the broken fence. "Get those people off my land." She didn't move. "It's not your land anymore." For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. Dawson Creek Ranch had been in my family since my grandfather started putting the place together decades ago. I knew every fence line, every recorded parcel, every water filing attached to those 2,400 acres. Cedar Ridge had never owned 1 foot of it. Vanessa opened the folder. "You sold the property to Sutton Land Development for $3.6 million. Then she handed me a deed. I didn't take my eyes off her at first. "You want to try that again? The transfer has already been recorded." That got my attention. I took the paper. There was my full legal name, Caleb Dawson. There were the parcel numbers, all of them. The legal description covered Dawson Creek Ranch from the eastern boundary to the upper pasture and down through the creek corridor. Then I saw the signature. Mine. Or close enough that somebody who had never watched me sign my name might believe it. Below it sat a notary acknowledgement, recording number, and county certification. For about 10 seconds, I said nothing. Vanessa mistook that silence for fear. "The sale is complete," she said. "You should have received notice. I didn't sell anything. You had substantial outstanding obligations." "What obligations?" "Cedar Ridge assessments, enforcement costs, legal fees, accumulated liens." I almost laughed. "My ranch isn't in Cedar Ridge." Vanessa reached back into the folder. "I expected you to say that." She produced another document. "According to this one, 4 years earlier, I had voluntarily joined Cedar Ridge Estates and agreed to subject Dawson Creek Ranch to its covenants." There was my signature again. Another forgery. I felt the anger then, hot and immediate. But anger wasn't going to move those survey crews off my pasture. Evidence might. So I pulled out my phone. Vanessa smiled. "Calling your attorney?" I photographed the fake membership agreement. Then the deed. Then the recording number. Then Vanessa. Her smile disappeared. I photographed every SUV plate, both survey trucks, the men beside my barn, the orange stakes, the damaged fence, and the sold sign drilled into my father's gate. One of the surveyors lowered his equipment. Vanessa said, "You need to stop doing that." "No. You're interfering with an authorized development survey." "Then whoever authorized it can explain it to the sheriff." I called Daniel Brooks. Sheriff Brooks had worked this county long enough to know the difference between a neighbor argument and something that could turn ugly. I told him there were unauthorized crews on my ranch claiming they had a recorded deed. He arrived 17 minutes later. Vanessa met him before he reached me. That told me plenty. "Sheriff," she said, "Mr. Dawson is refusing to recognize a completed property transfer." Daniel held out his hand. "Let me see it." Vanessa gave him the deed. He read the first page, then the second. "This recorded?" "Yes." "County?" "Of course." Daniel looked at me. "You sign this?" "No." Vanessa exhaled sharply. "He can't simply deny a recorded instrument because he's changed his mind." "I didn't change my mind. I never signed it." Daniel's expression tightened. But he didn't handcuff anybody. He didn't order Vanessa off the property. Instead, he said the words I didn't want to hear. "Caleb, if this is actually recorded, ownership may be a civil title issue until we establish what's legitimate." Vanessa smiled again. "There you are." I looked at Daniel. "So they can stand on my ranch while we figure out whether the document they're holding is fake?" "I didn't say that." Vanessa pointed toward the survey crew. "We have development deadlines." "You're done surveying for now," Daniel said. Her head snapped toward him. "On what authority?" "Mine, until I know whether I'm looking at a legitimate transfer or somebody trying to use my badge to enforce a fraudulent one." That finally shut her up. Daniel walked toward his cruiser with the deed. I followed him halfway. "Who are you calling?" "Thomas Reed, the county recorder." Daniel shut the driver's door and made the call from inside. Vanessa stood near her SUV watching me. Behind her, the sold sign moved slightly in the wind. I could see the bolt heads driven into the old wood. My father had built that gate when I was young enough to stand beside him and hand him tools. He'd always said a fence wasn't there to start trouble. It was there so honest, people knew where one man's responsibility ended and another man's began. Vanessa had crossed mine and brought paperwork to make the crossing look legal. That bothered me more than the sign. Anybody could trespass. This had taken planning. Someone knew my parcel numbers. Someone had copied my signature. Someone had created an HOA membership record that never existed. And if Vanessa was telling the truth about the county filing, someone had gotten a forged deed far enough into the system to make professionals hesitate before calling it fake. Daniel stayed in the cruiser longer than I expected. Vanessa walked closer. "You should start thinking practically, Caleb." "About what?" "Your remaining property." I stared at her. She gave me a small, practiced smile. "After liens, assessments, legal expenses, and transaction costs, there may still be funds available to you. Fighting this will only consume more of them." "You're talking like you've already spent my money." "I'm talking like someone who understands what has already happened." That sentence stayed with me. Not what might happen. What had already happened. Then Daniel's cruiser door opened. He stepped out holding Vanessa's deed. Something in his face had changed. The uncertainty was gone. He walked straight past Vanessa and handed the document to me. "What did Thomas say?" I asked. Daniel looked once toward the survey crews, then toward the recording stamp at the bottom of the page. "Thomas is looking at his system right now." Vanessa folded her arms. "And?" Daniel turned toward her. "So, he says this certification carries his office identifier." "Exactly. But he didn't issue it." Vanessa's expression didn't move immediately. "Mine didn't either." Daniel continued. "Thomas Reed says he never certified this transfer." The pasture went strangely quiet. One of the surveyors stopped talking. Vanessa finally said, "Then he's mistaken." Daniel shook his head. "No, he was very specific." I looked down at their deed again. The signature wasn't mine. The HOA agreement wasn't mine. And now the county recorder was saying the certification wasn't his. But the deed still carried an official recording number. It was still sitting there on paper, as though somebody had successfully sold 2,400 acres that had never belonged to them. I looked past Vanessa toward the orange stakes disappearing across Dawson Creek Ranch. Until that moment, I'd thought I was dealing with an HOA president who had finally pushed too far. Now I understood the problem was much worse. Somebody hadn't just forged my name. Somebody had figured out how to make the government record believe the lie, and I wanted to know who. By 8:30 that morning, Rachel Morgan was sitting at my kitchen table with Vanessa's deed sealed inside a clear evidence sleeve. Rachel had handled my property work for years. She didn't waste time asking whether I was sure I hadn't signed something. She opened her laptop, looked at the recording number, then asked me for every original land document I had. I brought out the fireproof records box from the old barn, my grandfather's first deed, my father's inheritance filings, my own acquisition records, tax receipts, water filings, survey maps, easement agreements. Rachel arranged them by date. "We don't prove Vanessa wrong by arguing with her," she said. "We prove what happened to this land every step of the way." That was exactly what we did. By noon, the chain was clean. Dawson Creek Ranch had grown through several recorded purchases and family transfers, but all 2,400 acres led legally to me. There was no sale to Greg Sutton, no conveyance to Cedar Ridge Estates, no document giving Vanessa authority over the ranch. More importantly, there was no legitimate HOA lien anywhere in my records. Rachel tapped Vanessa's deed. "So this shouldn't exist." "But it does. In the index," she corrected. "That's different from being valid." That distinction mattered. A fraudulent document could appear official long enough to do real damage. A bank could freeze financing. A developer could send crews. A title company could hesitate. A sheriff could be forced to determine whether he was facing trespass or a civil ownership fight. Vanessa didn't need the lie to survive forever. She only needed it to survive long enough to push me off my land. At 1:15, Michael Carter arrived. Michael had surveyed ranch property across the county for more than 30 years. He carried a field book, a metal detector, and copies of older plats Rachel had requested. We started at the eastern boundary where Vanessa's crews had driven their orange stakes. The first original monument was exactly where it should have been. So was the second. At the third, Michael scraped dirt away from an old survey cap and read the number. He looked toward Cedar Ridge. "Your line hasn't moved." "I knew that. I know you knew it. Now I can testify to it." That was the difference between being right and being able to prove you were right. Michael documented every monument. Vanessa's new stakes weren't correcting a boundary. They were simply crossing one. While Michael worked, Sheriff Brooks called. "Thomas found something." Rachel put him on speaker. Thomas Reed sounded angry. "I pulled the certification number off the deed. The format is ours." Rachel asked, "Meaning?" "Meaning whoever made it knew how our authentication system works." My stomach tightened. "But you didn't issue it." "No." "Can you prove that?" A pause. "Yes." Thomas explained that county certification numbers weren't random. Part of each number identified the terminal that generated it. The number on my supposed deed pointed to Terminal 4. There was just one problem. Terminal 4 had been retired almost 3 years earlier. Rachel leaned toward the phone. "When does the deed claim it was certified?" 6 weeks ago." Silence settled over my kitchen. A machine that hadn't been active in 3 years had supposedly certified a deed 6 weeks earlier. That wasn't a mistake. Somebody had built the fraud using information from the county's real system. Daniel said, "I'm preserving everything Thomas has." "Do that," Rachel replied. "And don't contact Vanessa about the terminal yet." I looked at her. "Why not?" "Because right now she thinks we're arguing about your signature. Let her keep thinking that." We didn't have to wait long. At 3:40, Vanessa returned. This time she stayed outside the gate. Maybe Daniel's presence that morning had taught her something. Or maybe she was simply changing tactics. She handed Rachel an envelope. Formal notice. Rachel opened it. 24 hours to vacate Dawson Creek Ranch. Vanessa looked at me. After that, continued occupancy will be treated as unlawful possession. Rachel almost smiled. Of his own ranch? Of property he transferred. Then Vanessa produced the second recorded document again. The one claiming I had voluntarily joined Cedar Ridge 4 years earlier. Rachel examined it carefully. What meeting approved this? I don't carry 4-year-old board minutes in my vehicle. What declaration amendment incorporated Dawson Creek Ranch? You can request association records. What consideration did Caleb receive for subjecting 2,400 acres to your covenants? Vanessa's jaw tightened. The document speaks for itself. Rachel looked at me. No, documents don't speak. People make them speak. Vanessa turned toward her SUV. I called after her. You forged this one too. She stopped. Rachel touched my arm. A warning. Don't show our hand. Vanessa slowly looked back. You should be careful with accusations, Caleb. I held her gaze. And you should be careful with my name. She drove away. That evening, Rachel began searching older transfers around Cedar Ridge. I stayed at the table while she worked, comparing recording numbers and property histories. For nearly 2 hours, nothing moved except pages and the cursor across her screen. Then she stopped. Caleb. I looked up. She had opened a deed from 18 months earlier. Small ranch parcel north of Cedar Ridge. Different owner, different notary, different transaction. But the certification structure looked familiar. Rachel opened another, then another. By 10:20, 5 property transfers were spread across her screen. 5 different landowners. 5 parcels bordering or controlling access near Cedar Ridge. All had been transferred after alleged HOA debts. And every deed carried an authentication pattern tied to equipment that should not have been generating certifications at the time. I felt something colder than anger. Were these people members of Cedar Ridge? Rachel didn't answer immediately. That, she said, is what I'm checking next. She pulled up the oldest transfer. The former owner had held 40 acres outside the subdivision. The deed showed a forced transfer after unpaid association assessments, just like mine. Rachel leaned back. This isn't somebody trying something new on you. I looked at the 5 names. People I didn't know. Properties I had driven past without ever wondering who owned them. What are you saying? Rachel turned the screen toward me. I'm saying somebody may have been stealing land before they ever came through your gate. I looked toward the dark window. Somewhere beyond it, Vanessa's orange stakes were still standing in my pasture. That morning, I'd thought those stakes marked the beginning of the fight. Now I wasn't so sure. They might have marked the 6th time somebody had done this. By 9 the next morning, Vanessa Whitmore was back at my gate. Only this time she hadn't brought surveyors. She brought muscle. 2 tow trucks idled on the county road. A livestock trailer sat behind them. 4 private security men stood beside Vanessa's SUVs, and 3 contractors carried clipboards marked Cedar Ridge Property Recovery. The Wyoming wind kicked dust around their boots as Vanessa held up another document. Your 24-hour period is running out. Rachel stood beside me. What exactly are you planning to recover? Vanessa handed her the paper. Assets securing Mr. Dawson's outstanding obligations. The list was almost impressive. 2 tractors, my irrigation pumps, backup generator, livestock equipment, the equipment barn itself. Then I reached the bottom. My cattle. I looked at Vanessa. You're trying to inventory living animals under an HOA lien? They're assets located on transferred property. I turned to the man beside the first tow truck. You planning to take my tractor? He looked toward Vanessa before answering. We were told there's an administrative seizure order. Show it to me. Vanessa produced another page. Rachel read it once and handed it to Sheriff Brooks, who had arrived minutes earlier after I called him. Daniel scanned the page. Where's the judge's signature? Vanessa crossed her arms. This is an administrative enforcement matter. I asked where the judge signed it. The association has authority under its governing documents. Daniel looked at the security men. Nobody crosses that gate. Vanessa's face hardened. Sheriff, you're interfering with lawful recovery of secured assets. Then bring me a court order. Our attorney drafted. I don't care who drafted it. Daniel handed the paper back. If you want me standing here while you seize a man's cattle and equipment, you bring something with a real case number and a judge's signature. That shifted the mood. The tow operators stopped moving. One of the security men stepped away from the gate. Vanessa didn't. You're exposing the county to liability. Daniel nodded toward his cruiser. Have your lawyer call. I had already made sure nobody was driving anything off Dawson Creek Ranch. The newer tractors had remote fuel controls installed for theft prevention. I disabled them before sunrise and documented the shutdown with Rachel present. The older equipment was locked inside the barn. No confrontation, no chains across anybody's truck. No excuse for Vanessa to call me just property I owned, sitting exactly where I left it. That frustrated her more than shouting would have. So she changed tactics. At 10:15, a local news van appeared. Vanessa had called them. Within minutes, she was standing outside my gate telling a reporter that Cedar Ridge was attempting to resolve a difficult occupancy situation involving a former owner refusing to honor a lawful transfer. Former owner. Those words hit harder than I expected. I'd spent most of my adult life making sure Dawson Creek Ranch never became somebody else's problem. Taxes paid, fences maintained, water filings current, cattle accounted for. Now Vanessa was telling cameras I was trespassing on it. The reporter approached me. Mr. Dawson, Cedar Ridge says you're refusing to vacate property you legally transferred. What's your response? Vanessa watched from behind him. She wanted anger. I gave her a question. Did she show you a court order? The reporter hesitated. She showed us documentation of the transfer. Not what I asked. He glanced toward Vanessa. I continued. Did anybody show you an order signed by a judge authorizing them to remove me, seize my equipment, or take my cattle? No. Then that's my response. I walked away. By noon, the cameras were gone. Vanessa wasn't. Rachel had spent the morning tracing the 5 suspicious transfers we'd found the night before. Daniel joined her at my kitchen table while I brought in coffee. She pointed to 2 files. This one is across the county line. Daniel studied it. And this? Mortgage attached to the transaction. Federally insured lender. He looked up. The room changed. The forged deeds were no longer confined to one county recording office. Rachel opened another record. Same pattern. HOA assessment. Claimed membership. Debt transfer. Property conveyance. Daniel asked, same certification problem? Everyone we've checked. He sat back. What are the odds 5 unrelated property transfers accidentally carry the same impossible authentication pattern? Rachel didn't answer because nobody needed her to. Outside, I could hear one of Vanessa's tow trucks still running. Daniel gathered copies of the deeds and stood. Where are you going? To make a call. Thomas? No. He walked outside. I followed him to the cruiser. Vanessa was 30 yards away speaking to one of her contractors. When she saw Daniel carrying the files, she stopped talking. He got inside and shut the door. I watched him make the call through the windshield. It lasted almost 10 minutes. When he stepped back out, his expression was different from the day before. Not surprised. Committed. Who'd you call? Daniel looked past me toward Vanessa's SUVs. The feds. For a moment, even the wind seemed quieter. Why? He held up the 5 property files. Because somebody isn't just stealing your ranch anymore. Vanessa started walking toward us. Sheriff, are my crews being allowed to proceed? Daniel turned. No. On what basis? Until these documents are authenticated, nobody moves property, cattle, equipment, or survey markers off this ranch. Her eyes narrowed. You don't have jurisdiction to invalidate a recorded deed. Didn't say I did. Then what exactly are you doing? Preserving the situation until the people who do have jurisdiction get here. That was the first time I saw uncertainty cross Vanessa Whitmore's face, only for a second. Then it disappeared. Who is coming? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have to. Her attorney called less than 5 minutes later. By afternoon, the tow trucks were gone. The private guards pulled back to the county road. Vanessa left last, but before getting into her SUV, she looked across my pasture at the orange survey stakes. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was calculating. Rachel noticed it too. She knows something changed. How much do we tell whoever Daniel called? Everything. I looked toward the barn, then toward the eastern boundary where Cedar Ridge's rooftops sat beyond my fence. Yesterday, this had been about proving I hadn't sold my ranch. Now we had 5 other suspicious deeds, a false county certification, transactions crossing jurisdictional lines, and an HOA president willing to send tow trucks after cattle without a judge ever seeing the case. Just before sunset, Daniel called. They'll be there tomorrow morning. Who? He paused. Federal investigators. I looked across the 2,400 acres Vanessa had tried to reduce to paperwork. What do they think they're investigating? Daniel's answer was simple. They don't know yet. Neither did I. But somebody had built a system capable of making stolen land look legally transferred. Tomorrow, we were going to start finding out how far that system reached. Special Agent Claire Bennett arrived at Dawson Creek Ranch just after 8 the next morning. No convoy, no flashing lights, just 2 federal vehicles and 3 people carrying document cases. Claire shook my hand once. Sheriff Brooks says you have 5 other transfers. Rachel found them. Then let's start there. Within hours, my kitchen table became an evidence station. Rachel laid out the deeds. Thomas joined by video from the county office. Daniel brought reports from the attempted seizure. Claire's team compared dates, liens, lenders, shell companies, and HOA filings. The pattern appeared faster than I expected. First came violation notices, then claims that an outside landowner had somehow joined Cedar Ridge. Next came unpaid assessments and legal fees. Those debts were transferred to companies with names that sounded legitimate, but had almost no business history. Finally, the property changed hands at a fraction of its actual value. 5 owners, 5 variations of the same machine. Claire drew a line beneath the names. Your case is different. How? The others were smaller. She turned her laptop toward me. 28 acres, 43, 61, 76. The largest was 92, then mine, 2,400 acres. Rachel understood first. They got comfortable. Claire shook her head. Maybe. But people running a scheme this organized don't usually jump from 90 acres to 2,400 because they feel confident. She looked at me. What does your ranch control? Cattle ground. What else? 2 creeks, irrigation rights, private roads. Michael Carter had been listening from the other end of the table. He stood without saying anything and walked toward the stack of survey records. 20 minutes later, he pulled out a faded map. Here. It was dated 1958. I knew the document, but I'd never considered it important enough to explain what Vanessa was doing. Michael spread it flat. A narrow corridor crossed Dawson Creek Ranch from the Upper Springs toward what was now Cedar Ridge Estates. Original water and access agreement, he said. Rachel read the language. Existing residential service was permitted through the corridor. Maintenance access was permitted with notice. Then she reached the restriction. No substantial increase in commercial or development-related water use without written consent from the owner of Dawson Creek Ranch. Claire looked at me. You ever give that consent? No. Did Vanessa ask? Never. Michael pointed east. Cedar Ridge can serve what already exists, but a major expansion changes the use. Rachel was already searching her files. 3 days earlier, Vanessa's sold sign had looked like arrogance. Now I began to understand it as a deadline. By early afternoon, Rachel found the first development filing, Cedar Ridge West, then another, a private resort, golf course, hundreds of additional homes, recreation facilities, road improvements, commercial water projections. The estimated development value exceeded $100 million. Claire placed the plans beside the 1958 agreement. There it was. Every major phase depended on expanded water capacity, and that capacity crossed my ranch. They didn't need an easement, Rachel said quietly. They already had one, I answered. Michael nodded. They needed the restriction gone. Rachel looked directly at me. And the easiest way to eliminate the owner's objection, Claire finished it, is to become the owner. I stared at the water map. Vanessa hadn't risked everything because she wanted 2,400 acres of Wyoming pasture. She needed control of the corridor beneath it. If Sutton Land Development became the legal owner of Dawson Creek Ranch, the opposition to expanded water use disappeared with my name from the title. The fake HOA debt wasn't the goal. Neither was the fake membership. Those were tools. The ranch was the key to something worth more than $100 million. That afternoon, Greg Sutton came through my gate alone. He looked nothing like the man Vanessa had described as the proud new owner. He looked like someone who had finally started reading the fine print. My company relied on recorded title, he said. Rachel answered, Your company relied on a forged deed. Greg looked at me. I didn't know. You know now. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. If this collapses, I've got investors exposed. And if you keep going, Claire said, you may have a different kind of exposure. Greg understood. Claire didn't ask him to confess to anything. She asked him to attend his next scheduled meeting with Vanessa and behave exactly as he normally would. He agreed. 2 nights later, Greg returned with an audio file. We listened in my kitchen. Vanessa's voice came through first, calm and impatient. Greg asked whether the title challenge could unwind the project. Vanessa answered that Caleb Dawson was stalling. Then Greg asked what happened if I produced the original records. There was a short pause. Vanessa said, Once Dawson's original records are gone, nobody can unwind the transfer. Nobody spoke after the recording ended. I looked at Rachel, then Daniel, then Claire. She asked, Where are the originals? I already knew why she was asking. The old equipment barn. Claire stood. We moved them. I shook my head. If we move everything tonight, and Vanessa has somebody watching, she'll know Greg talked. Rachel studied me. What are you suggesting? We protect the originals, but we let her think they're still where she expects. Claire considered that. Then she nodded once. The real documents were photographed, cataloged, and moved under federal evidence protection before dark. The fireproof records box stayed inside the barn. From the outside, nothing changed. That night, Dawson Creek Ranch went quiet. No SUVs, no tow trucks, no survey crews, just 2,400 acres sitting under a black Wyoming sky. At 2:18 a.m., one of my security cameras sent an alert. Headlights had appeared beyond the southern pasture. A pickup was moving toward the barn with its lights off. Then 2 men stepped out. One carried bolt cutters, the other carried fuel cans. My first instinct was to go outside. That barn wasn't just lumber and sheet metal. My father had raised the original frame, and I'd spent 30 years repairing everything time and Wyoming winters tried to tear out of it. Claire Bennett stopped me before I reached the door. No. They're on my property. Exactly. Let them prove why. We were watching from a darkened equipment room nearly half a mile away. Sheriff Daniel Brooks sat beside Claire, while two federal teams waited beyond the southern fence where the intruders couldn't see them. Rachel had gone home hours earlier, believing the ranch was quiet. It wasn't. The pickup rolled to a stop beside the barn. No headlights. No license plate visible from the rear camera. The first man tested the side door. The second walked around toward the main entrance and looked directly at one of my cameras. For a second, I thought he'd spotted it. Then he turned away. "Hold," Claire said into her radio. The bolt cutters closed around my lock. Metal snapped. My hands tightened against the edge of the desk. Daniel noticed. "Caleb, I know. No heroics, no confrontation. We needed evidence more than I needed the satisfaction of running them off." The men opened the barn door. One went straight toward the cabinet where Vanessa believed my original deeds were stored. Not the tractors, not the generator, not thousands of dollars in tools. The records cabinet. That told Claire everything she needed. The second man carried a fuel can inside. "Now?" Daniel asked. Claire waited. The first intruder forced open the cabinet. The second removed something from his coat and knelt near the wall. Claire lifted her radio. "Move!" The ranch exploded with white light. Federal vehicles came over the rise from two directions, while Daniel's deputies closed the road behind the pickup. "Federal agents, step away from the building!" Both men froze. One dropped the fuel can. The other raised his hands. It was over in seconds. No shots, no chase, no barn fire. Just two men standing beneath the lights, realizing the empty records box in front of them had been bait. I walked over only after Claire cleared the area. She pointed at the cabinet. They knew exactly where to go. Daniel was checking the pickup. "Caleb, you need to see this." Inside were blank Cedar Ridge forms, prepaid phones, cutting tools, photographs of my barn, and a printed diagram marking the location of the fireproof cabinet. Claire found another document beneath the passenger seat. She read it twice. "What?" She handed it to me. It described an electrical malfunction scheduled to be discovered after sunrise. I looked toward the fuel cans. They were going to make this look accidental. That's what the document suggests. Daniel identified the first man from his credentials, Cedar Ridge Private Security. The second had done contract work for the legal operation Vanessa had been using. That should have felt like victory. It didn't. Claire spread everything across the hood of her vehicle. No direct instruction from Vanessa. Daniel frowned. They came here looking for the exact documents she talked about. I know. They work for people connected to Cedar Ridge. I know. And they brought a plan to destroy the building. Claire looked at him. That's evidence. It isn't the same thing as evidence that Vanessa personally ordered it. I hated that distinction. But I'd spent the last 3 days demanding that everyone respect the difference between a real legal document and a fake one. I couldn't suddenly stop caring about proof, because proof had become inconvenient. So we keep building the case, I said. Claire nodded. We keep building it. The men were taken away before dawn. For a few minutes afterward, the ranch became completely still. I stood inside the barn and looking at the broken cabinet. The original deeds were safe. The building was still standing, but whoever was behind this had moved from paperwork to trying to erase paperwork. That meant they were scared. At 5:51 a.m., my phone started ringing. Rachel. Turn on the television. I went back to the house. Vanessa Whitmore was already on the local morning news. She stood outside Cedar Ridge's clubhouse wearing the same composed expression she'd worn while handing me the fake deed. Behind her was a banner, Protect Cedar Ridge Families. She told reporters there had been an incident at Dawson Creek Ranch overnight. Then she called it staged. I believe Mr. Dawson is attempting to manufacture a criminal narrative around what remains a legitimate property dispute. I stared at the screen. she continued. According to Vanessa, I had become increasingly unstable after learning the ranch had been transferred. She claimed Cedar Ridge had received reports that I was sabotaging equipment and creating false evidence to delay development. Rachel said through the phone, "Don't respond." She knows 2 of her people were arrested. She knows something happened. We don't know what she's been told. Vanessa looked directly into the camera. We will not allow intimidation to harm hundreds of homeowners who relied in good faith on this project. That was clever. She wasn't defending herself. She was wrapping herself in the residents. By 7, the story was everywhere locally. By 9, one of my cattle buyers called. He'd seen the reports. His company didn't want to be caught in an ownership dispute involving livestock that might become subject to competing claims. He suspended our purchase contract. Not canceled, suspended. It still cost me. At 10:30, my bank called. They were reviewing the ranch's operating line until title status was clarified. At 11:05, an agricultural inspector contacted me about an anonymous complaint involving livestock conditions. By noon, I understood Vanessa's next strategy. If she couldn't remove me physically, she'd make everyone around me afraid to do business with me. Rachel came through the kitchen door carrying a legal pad. "You all right?" "No." It was the first honest answer I'd given anybody that morning. I looked through the window toward the barn. They tried to take my ranch. That didn't work. They tried to take my equipment. That didn't work. Last night, somebody tried to destroy my records. Rachel waited. And now? I looked at the television, where my name was still running beneath footage of Vanessa. "Now they're taking my reputation." Rachel set the legal pad down. "Then we document that too." I almost laughed. Of course we did. Receipts, contracts, calls, complaints. Lost business, another file, another trail. Because Vanessa still believed paperwork was her weapon. She hadn't understood yet that every lie she put on paper gave us something else to preserve. Then Rachel's phone buzzed. She read the message without speaking. "Who is it?" She turned the screen toward me. The message contained only one sentence. "My name is Linda Parker. I'm the Cedar Ridge treasurer. We need to meet somewhere Vanessa can't see us." Rachel didn't answer immediately. She forwarded the message to Claire Bennett. An hour later, the 3 of them met at a roadside diner 20 miles from Cedar Ridge. I stayed at the ranch. Claire wanted Linda talking to people she didn't already view as enemies. And by then, Vanessa had turned my face into the public symbol of everything she claimed was threatening the community. Rachel returned, carrying a thin brown folder. She's scared. Of Vanessa? Of what she signed. Linda had served as Cedar Ridge's treasurer for 6 years. Most of what crossed her desk looked ordinary. Landscaping, insurance, road maintenance, security, legal bills. Then Rachel opened the folder. One vendor appeared again and again. Land resolution services. Payments started small, $9,000, $14,000, then $48,000, $72,000. More than $400,000 had moved through that account over several years. For what? Linda doesn't know. That doesn't sound like much of a treasurer. Rachel didn't defend her. She approved expenditures Vanessa described as legal property enforcement. She says the supporting invoices were handled through Vanessa's office. Claire arrived 15 minutes later with preliminary corporate records. Land Resolution Services had almost no public footprint. Its mailing address belonged to a commercial mailbox. But money leaving the company connected to another entity that had purchased one of the 5 suspicious HOA debts. Another payment reached a contractor tied to the men arrested at my barn. I stared at the transactions. So Cedar Ridge money helped fund this. Possibly, Claire said. We're following it. Linda knows more. Rachel nodded. She does. The second meeting happened that afternoon. This time, Linda agreed to come to my ranch. She looked uncomfortable the moment she saw the broken barn lock. I didn't know about that. I said nothing. She looked at me. I voted for enforcement actions. I approved legal expenses. Vanessa always said you were blocking Cedar Ridge from protecting its future. My future apparently didn't count. Linda lowered her eyes. No. That answer was more honest than an apology. Claire placed the land resolution records on the table. Who authorized these? Vanessa. You signed them. I signed payment summaries. Without invoices? I asked. And? Linda hesitated. She told me certain acquisitions had to remain confidential because landowners would increase their prices if they knew Cedar Ridge was interested. Rachel leaned forward. Did you ever hear the term manufactured lien? No. False membership? No. Forged deed? Linda looked toward me. Not until yours. Claire pushed another sheet across the table. Is this all the money? Linda didn't touch it. No. The room went to still. There is another account. Rachel asked, HOA account? I don't know exactly what it is. It appears in our internal summaries as a strategic reserve, but I don't receive full statements. You're the treasurer. I know. Who does? Linda swallowed. Vanessa. Claire's voice stayed flat. Anyone else? Not that I know of. Balance? Last number I saw was over 8 million. That changed everything. Claire gathered the documents. We need lawful access before anyone moves it. Linda looked frightened. If Vanessa realizes I came here, she won't hear it from us, Claire said. But Vanessa was already moving faster than we were. My phone rang, then Rachel's, then Linda's, all within 30 seconds. Cedar Ridge residents had received an emergency notice. Mandatory special association meeting, that night. Rachel opened the attachment. Her expression hardened. What? She turned the phone around. Vanessa was proposing a $72 million bond. The stated purpose was to secure strategic Western property interests, complete Cedar Ridge West, expand community infrastructure, and resolve pending litigation. I read it twice. She wants the homeowners to buy my ranch. Rachel shook her head. Worse. She wants them obligated to the debt before a court decides whether Cedar Ridge owns anything. Linda went pale. She can't issue that without a vote. That's why she's holding one tonight. Claire read the financing terms. If this passes, every household could become financially tied to the project. Vanessa wasn't retreating. She was building a wall of innocent homeowners around herself. If hundreds of families borrowed $72 million based on the supposed ownership of Dawson Creek Ranch, unwinding the fraud would become more painful, more political, and more confusing. Exactly what she wanted. The bank called me again before sunset. My operating line remained under review. Then the cattle buyer confirmed he wouldn't reinstate our contract until the title dispute was resolved. 2 losses in one day. Neither had anything to do with whether I could raise cattle. Vanessa had turned doubt itself into a weapon. I walked outside and stood behind the closed private property sign Daniel had placed near the gate. For 30 years, I'd measured my life in things that could be checked. Head counts, feed invoices, fence posts, tax receipts, water levels. A man could make a mistake, but numbers gave him somewhere to go back and find it. Vanessa's strategy was different. Say the lie loudly enough, stamp it officially enough, repeat it often enough, and make everybody afraid to wait for the truth. Rachel came outside. She wants you angry tonight. I'm already angry. I know. Don't give it to her. I looked toward Cedar Ridge beyond the eastern fence. What do we give her? Rachel held up 3 documents. My authentic deed, Michael Carter's 1958 water map, and the proposed bond agreement. The truth, she said. In front of the people she's asking to pay $72 million for your ranch. Behind us, Linda stepped onto the porch. If I walk into that meeting with you, I'm finished with Vanessa. Claire looked at her. If these records are what you say they are, that may be the least of your problems. Linda nodded slowly. Then she straightened. I'll testify to every payment I approved. For the first time since Vanessa nailed that sold sign to my gate, I wasn't preparing to defend Dawson Creek Ranch from another attack. I was going into Cedar Ridge, and this time Vanessa would have to explain her paperwork in front of the people she expected to pay for it. The conference hall was packed before we arrived. Hundreds of homeowners filled the chairs, while Vanessa stood beneath a projection screen displaying Cedar Ridge West, protecting our community's future. She had turned my ranch into a sales presentation. The moment I entered with Rachel, Linda, and Greg Sutton, conversations stopped. Vanessa stared at Linda first. That told me exactly who she feared most. This is a members-only meeting, Vanessa said. Linda kept walking. I'm still the treasurer. Vanessa's attorneys whispered to one another. Nobody stopped us. On the screen appeared the number Vanessa wanted approved. $72,000. She told residents the bond would secure the western expansion, protect property values, expand infrastructure, and resolve the temporary title challenge involving Dawson Creek Ranch. Temporary. Then one of her attorneys explained what would happen if homeowners rejected it. Projects would collapse. Legal expenses would rise. Property values could fall. Individual families could lose tens of thousands of dollars. Fear moved through the room exactly the way Vanessa intended. Then Rachel handed me 3 documents. That was all I carried to the microphone. Vanessa saw me coming. You don't have the floor, Linda stood. As treasurer and board member, I moved that Mr. Dawson be permitted 5 minutes before this association takes on $72 million in debt. Several homeowners shouted their agreement. Vanessa couldn't shut them all down. I put my deed beneath the document camera. This is the recorded chain showing my ownership of Dawson Creek Ranch, Vanessa interrupted. Ownership is disputed. I ignored her. The second document went up. Michael Carter's 1958 Water and Access Agreement. This is the agreement governing the water corridor crossing my ranch. People leaned forward. I showed them the restriction on expanded commercial use. Then I displayed Vanessa's bond contract. This is what you're voting on tonight. A man near the front called out, "We know what it is. Do you know what happens if Cedar Ridge never gets legal title to my ranch?" The room quieted. I enlarged the financing clause Rachel had marked. The debt doesn't disappear. Someone asked, "What does that mean?" Rachel answered from beside me. So, it means the association can remain obligated under the financing terms, even if the property acquisition fails. Noise spread through the hall. Vanessa grabbed her microphone. This is deliberate distortion by an individual attempting to sabotage a project beneficial to every family here. Greg Sutton stood. No. Vanessa froze. Greg walked toward the front. Sutton Land Development cannot currently establish clear title to Dawson Creek Ranch. The room erupted. Vanessa called him dishonest. Greg didn't react. My company relied on documents supplied through this transaction. We are now cooperating with investigators because serious questions exist regarding their authenticity. A woman behind me shouted, "You told us the title was settled." Another demanded to know why the HOA was borrowing money against disputed land. Vanessa tried to restore order. Then Linda stepped forward. I also need to disclose financial information. That did more damage than anything I'd said. She described land resolution services, the unexplained payments, the incomplete invoices, the strategic reserve account she had been prevented from fully reviewing. Vanessa's face changed. You approved those payments. I approved summaries you provided. You're attempting to protect yourself. I'm telling them what I signed. Homeowners were standing now. Questions came from every direction. Where had the money gone? Who controlled the reserve? Why had Cedar Ridge been paying companies connected to land acquisitions? Why were they voting on $72 million before a judge determined who owned the ranch? Vanessa finally lost control. She pointed at me. This entire project is being held hostage by one rancher and an obsolete agreement written in 1958. There it was. I said nothing. She kept going. Once Cedar Ridge controls Dawson's ranch, those old water restrictions won't matter anymore. The room went silent. Not gradually, instantly. Vanessa heard her own words too late. Rachel looked at me. Greg lowered his eyes. Linda simply stared at Vanessa. For days, Vanessa had insisted this was about a legitimate property transfer and unpaid obligations. Now, in front of hundreds of homeowners, she'd admitted exactly why controlling my ranch mattered. The water restrictions. I stepped away from the microphone. Vanessa tried to recover. That is not what I meant. A voice from the back answered, sounded pretty clear. Then the rear doors opened. Claire Bennett entered with 2 federal agents. She carried a document folder. Vanessa's attorney moved toward her. What is this? Claire handed him the first order. Federal Preservation and Financial Restraint Order, covering specified transactions and accounts connected to the disputed property transfers. Another agent served copies on the board. The $72 million vote stopped immediately. Vanessa stared at Claire. You cannot freeze an entire association because Caleb Dawson refuses to accept a sale. This isn't based on Mr. Dawson refusing anything. Claire's voice never rose. It concerns evidence of potentially fraudulent property transfers and associated financial transactions. For the first time that night, homeowners weren't looking at me. They were looking at Vanessa. Then she smiled. Small, controlled, almost relieved. You still have a problem, Agent Bennett. Claire waited. Vanessa pointed toward me. You've spent days proving Caleb's signature may not be genuine. You've questioned payments. You've frightened residents. You've embarrassed this board. Rachel's expression tightened. But you cannot prove I forged anything. The room quieted again. Vanessa looked around at the residents. Can you? Claire didn't answer immediately, because Vanessa was right about one thing. We had evidence showing a system. We had fake deeds, fake HOA membership, impossible certification numbers, money moving through shell companies, men at my barn, Greg's recording, Linda's records, and Vanessa's public admission that Cedar Ridge needed control of my water corridor. But we still didn't have the one piece that tied her hand directly to the creation of my forged signature. Vanessa mistook Claire's silence for victory. I thought so. Claire looked at me, then at Rachel. Finally, she turned back to Vanessa. No. Vanessa's smile widened. Not yet. That erased it. Claire gathered the documents from the table. As homeowners crowded around Linda demanding access to financial records, Claire walked over to me. We've been asking the wrong final question. What question? Whether the deed is fake. We already know it is. Exactly. She looked toward Vanessa, now surrounded by angry residents and attorneys. Then we stop proving the deed is fake. Claire picked up the photocopy bearing my forged signature and prove who made it. The next morning, Thomas Reed asked us to meet him at the county records office. He had stopped studying the signature entirely. Instead, he'd laid my forged deed beside copies of the 5 suspicious transfers Rachel found. Look at the left margin. I did. Nothing jumped out. Thomas placed a transparent measurement sheet over the first deed, then the second. The text on every fraudulent transfer sat slightly too far from the edge, barely enough to notice. County software doesn't format documents like this, Thomas said. Rachel leaned closer. But something does. Thomas nodded. He had compared the filings against document templates used by title companies, law offices, and local associations. One commercial document processing system produced the exact same alignment error after converting a file into recording format. Claire asked the obvious question. Who licenses it? Thomas turned his monitor toward us. Cedar Ridge Estates. That wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough for Claire to seek authority, to look deeper. By afternoon, investigators had a search warrant covering specific Cedar Ridge computer systems and records connected to the disputed property transfers. Vanessa's attorneys fought immediately. They argued the HOA's files contained privileged legal communications, private homeowner information, and unrelated financial data. The court narrowed the search. Claire didn't complain. She didn't need everything. She needed the machine that had touched my deed. Federal technicians imaged the authorized systems instead of letting anyone alter them. Deleted files began appearing. Old drafts, temporary documents, scanned signatures, property records. Then one technician called Claire over. He had found a folder containing scanned signatures belonging to multiple landowners from the 5 earlier transfers. Mine was there too. I recognized the source immediately. An agricultural easement application I'd signed years earlier. The original had nothing to do with Cedar Ridge, but somebody had obtained a copy, isolated my signature, and stored it as an image. Rachel looked at me. That's why the forgery was so close. They didn't imitate it. No, they copied it. Claire pointed toward another recovered file. Dawson Transfer Final. My name sat there in plain text. For the first time since Vanessa had handed me that deed at the gate, we weren't looking at the finished lie. We were looking at the workshop where somebody built it. The file history showed repeated edits, parcel descriptions added, dates changed, certification information inserted, my signature image positioned beneath the transfer language, and several editing sessions had occurred through an administrator account assigned to Vanessa Whitmore. I thought that was it. Claire didn't. Account access isn't identity. I stared at her. Her name is on the account. Her attorneys will say employees used it. Rachel nodded reluctantly. Shared credentials, assistant access, automated processes. There are plenty of explanations they'll try. Vanessa's lawyers did exactly that. Before sunset, they issued a statement claiming multiple Cedar Ridge employees had administrative access, and Vanessa had never personally created, modified, or approved any fraudulent deed. Then Vanessa appeared outside the clubhouse. Again. She told cameras federal investigators were twisting ordinary digital records into a conspiracy because they couldn't prove their original allegations. I turned the television off. She always has one more explanation. Rachel closed her laptop. That's what explanations are for. What? Buying time until evidence removes them. The forensic team kept working. Hours passed. They reconstructed deleted directories and compared timestamps against system logs. Most of it was technical noise. Then Claire called just after midnight. Come to the federal field office. Rachel and I drove in together. Thomas was already there. On the monitor was an earlier version of Dawson Transfer Final. Not the completed deed, a working draft. Claire pointed toward a comment box embedded in the document. This was automatically saved during editing and deleted from the final version. I read it. Use Dawson signature sample. Make transfer look older than the HOA dispute. For several seconds, nobody spoke. There it was. Not a copied signature sitting unexplained in a folder. An instruction. Someone had deliberately ordered my real signature sample used to manufacture an older-looking transfer. I read it again. Can Vanessa explain that away? Claire didn't answer yet. The technician enlarged the metadata panel. The comment had a creation time, a user identifier, a session number. But proving which human being had physically controlled that session required another layer of authentication. Rachel asked, "What do you need?" Device records, login history, session authentication. We tie those together. We can determine whether Vanessa was actually using the account. Thomas pointed toward the screen. And if you can't? Then her attorneys say somebody else used her credentials. I leaned back. We had come all this way because small details kept betraying large lies. A certification number from a dead county terminal, A 1958 water restriction buried in an old agreement. A margin shifted a fraction too far. Now a deleted comment sitting inside a forgotten draft. Vanessa had built her power by making fraudulent paperwork look official. But every layer she added created another place for the truth to survive. Claire printed the recovered comment and placed it inside an evidence sleeve. Tomorrow we authenticate the session. I looked at the words one last time. Use Dawson's signature sample. Whoever wrote that sentence hadn't made a clerical error. They had known my signature was being stolen. They had known the document needed to be backdated. And they had known exactly what the forged deed was supposed to accomplish. Now only one question remained. Whose hands had been on Vanessa Whitmore's account when that instruction was written? By noon, Claire Bennett had the answer. Federal technicians rebuilt the login history around the exact minute the comment was created. The administrator account belonged to Vanessa, but that alone wasn't enough. So they matched the session against the device authentication records, network logs, and security credentials used inside Cedar Ridge's office. All of them pointed to the same machine, Vanessa's personal office computer. The session had begun with her credentials. Her registered device had authenticated it. The comment had been entered during that session, and Dawson Transfer Final had been saved less than 2 minutes later. Claire laid the forensic report on the table. This is what we were missing. Rachel read every page before looking up. Can they still argue somebody else was sitting at her computer? They can argue anything. Claire tapped the report. But now they'd have to explain Vanessa's credentials, Vanessa's device, Vanessa's session, Greg's recording, Linda's financial records, the signature archive, and the attempt to destroy Caleb's originals. For the first time, the evidence wasn't pointing generally toward Cedar Ridge. It pointed directly at Vanessa. Claire didn't announce it to the press. She let the legal process do the talking. Vanessa arrived with 2 attorneys when investigators confronted her with the recovered draft. She walked into the room, still composed. Then Claire slid the document across the table. Vanessa read the comment. Use Dawson's signature sample. Make transfer look older than the HOA dispute. Her face didn't change. Not yet. Then Claire placed the authentication report beside it. Vanessa's eyes moved down the page. Device, account, session, timestamp. She stopped reading. Claire said, "Would you like to explain why that instruction was created during your authenticated session?" Vanessa looked toward her attorneys. Neither spoke. It was the first time since I'd found her standing beside my gate that she didn't have an answer ready. No accusation, no threat, no speech about protecting families. Just silence. The ownership hearing opened before Judge Robert Mitchell 2 days later. By then, the question before the court was brutally simple. Had I ever legally transferred Dawson Creek Ranch? Rachel started at the beginning, not with Vanessa, not with the federal investigation, with the land, my grandfather's purchase records, my father's inheritance documents, my later acquisitions, tax records, survey monuments, water filings. Michael Carter testified that the physical boundaries matched the legitimate recorded descriptions. Thomas Reed explained why the certification on Vanessa's deed could not have been generated when the document claimed. Then Rachel introduced the supposed Cedar Ridge membership agreement. Same signature problem. Same absence of legitimate authorization. Same manufactured paper trail. Vanessa's attorneys argued that recording created a presumption of validity and that Sutton Land Development had relied on public records in good faith. Judge Mitchell stopped them. A recording system records instruments presented to it. It does not transform fraud into ownership. Nobody moved. Rachel then introduced the forensic evidence. My authentic signature sample, Dawson Transfer Final, the recovered comment, the administrator session, the device authentication. Greg's recording followed. Vanessa's voice filled the courtroom. Once Dawson's original records are gone, Nobody can unwind the transfer. Then Linda testified about land resolution services and the restricted reserve account. Claire summarized the links between the suspicious deeds, shell companies, and financial transactions now under federal investigation. Vanessa's attorneys tried to separate every piece. The computer could have been used by someone else. The payments might have legitimate purposes. Greg could have misunderstood her words. The barn intrusion wasn't personally ordered by Vanessa. Rachel let them finish. Then she stood. Any one piece might invite an excuse. The problem is that all of them point in the same direction. She placed my authentic deed beside the forged one. One chain is supported by decades of legitimate records, taxes, surveys, possession, and filings. Then she touched Vanessa's document. The other depends on a signature Caleb Dawson did not make, an HOA enrollment he never authorized, a certification generated through a system that could not have issued it, and a digital draft instructing someone to use his real signature sample. Judge Mitchell recessed. Those 40 minutes felt longer than the entire week before them. I sat beside Rachel without speaking. I wasn't thinking about damages, or Vanessa. I was thinking about my father's gate with the bolt holes still torn through it. A piece of paper had come closer to taking 2,400 acres than any fence cutter or tow truck ever could. Judge Mitchell returned. Everyone stood. He ruled that the purported transfer was fraudulent and void from its inception. Not void from that morning. Not canceled because we'd challenged it. Void from the beginning. Dawson Creek Ranch had never legally left my ownership for a single day. I closed my eyes for 1 second. That was all I allowed myself. The judge continued. The fabricated Cedar Ridge membership document carried no lawful authority over the ranch. The disputed liens could not support the transfer. Transactions dependent upon the forged title were restrained pending further proceedings. Then came the part Vanessa hadn't expected. Judge Mitchell authorized continued freezes on identified shell company assets tied to the related transactions, while investigators determined how many other owners had been affected. Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is going to destroy Cedar Ridge." Judge Mitchell looked at her. "No, Ms. Whitmore. This court is determining who owns Mr. Dawson's ranch. The consequences of fraudulent conduct belong to whoever committed it." Vanessa sat down. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. I didn't celebrate. I said one sentence. Dawson Creek Ranch was never for sale. Then Claire approached Rachel and me carrying another folder. "You got your ranch back," she said. Something in her tone kept me from smiling. "What did you find?" She opened the folder. More names, more parcels, more questionable liens. The 5 properties Rachel had discovered weren't the full list. They were only the easiest ones to see. Claire turned another page, then another. Families had lost land. Some had moved away. Some had accepted settlements because they believed fighting recorded documents was hopeless. Some still didn't know the paperwork used against them might have been manufactured. I looked back through the courthouse doors. Vanessa had tried to erase my ownership. Instead, she'd given investigators the first clean path into everything surrounding it. My ranch was mine again, but the case was no longer only about Dawson Creek Ranch. The question now was what justice looked like for everyone who had lost before I learned how to fight back. The answer didn't come in one dramatic afternoon. It came through records, bank accounts, court orders, recovered deeds, and landowners who finally realized somebody was willing to believe them. Claire Bennett's investigation expanded beyond the 5 transfers Rachel had first identified. The same pattern kept appearing. Manufactured HOA debts, questionable membership records, shell companies, and property transfers that benefited people connected to Cedar Ridge's expansion plans. The federal case against Vanessa moved forward. So did cases against people who had knowingly helped build the system. The men connected to the barn intrusion faced their own proceedings. Financial investigators followed land resolution services into the network of companies that had received Cedar Ridge money. Assets connected to the disputed transfers were frozen before they could disappear. Vanessa's attorneys kept insisting Cedar Ridge itself would collapse. Judge Mitchell drew an important line. Ordinary homeowners were not the criminals simply because their dues had passed through a corrupt board. The people responsible would answer for what they had done. The residents would not be punished merely for living behind the same entrance sign. That distinction saved Cedar Ridge. Its governing leadership was removed, and independent financial oversight was put in place while residents elected replacements. Linda Parker stayed long enough to help investigators reconstruct the accounts she had approved. She didn't pretend innocence. "I should have asked harder questions," she told me once. I respected that more than an excuse. The $72 million bond disappeared before a single homeowner became responsible for it. Greg Sutton abandoned Cedar Ridge West and the resort project. His company surrendered any claim based on the fraudulent transfer and cooperated with investigators working through the related transactions. The orange survey stakes remained in my pasture for months. I left them there, not because I accepted them, because they were evidence. Then came the other owners. A widow whose 43 acres had been transferred after HOA assessments she never understood. A retired mechanic who had moved after being told fighting his recorded lien would cost more than his property was worth. A family who discovered the company that bought their supposed debt appeared in the same financial records Claire had seized. Not every case was identical. Not every loss could simply be reversed. But enough of the transactions were connected that frozen and recovered assets began going toward restoration and compensation under court supervision. The first time one of those owners got his land back, Rachel called me. "You should come." "I don't need to." "Why?" "Because it isn't my victory." There was silence. Then she said, "That's probably why you should." So I went. The man stood outside the county office holding a corrected title document with both hands. He didn't cheer. He just kept reading his name. I understood that. A month later, my bank restored the ranch operating line. The cattle contract I'd lost was replaced. The false title cloud was formally cleared. Damages covered the business losses, legal expenses, damaged fencing, barn repairs, and other losses the fraud had caused. I could have stopped there. Instead, I asked Rachel how many rural landowners facing questionable liens could afford weeks of survey work, title research, forensic review, and attorneys. Her answer was what I expected. Not many. So part of the recovery went into a legal defense fund for landowners facing fraudulent property seizures and manufactured association claims. Nothing grand, no building with my name on it. Just money for surveys, title searches, lawyers, and document review. The things that had saved my ranch. Months after the morning I found Vanessa at my gate, Michael Carter came back to Dawson Creek Ranch. This time he wasn't carrying an evidence folder. He carried a hammer. We started at the eastern pasture. The first orange stake came out easily. The second had been driven deeper. Michael pulled it loose and tossed it into the pickup. We worked our way across the line, one stake at a time. No developers behind us, no private guards, no television cameras. Just two men removing markers that never had any legal right to be there. At the water corridor, Michael stopped beside one of the old monuments. Still where it was in 1958, I looked toward Cedar Ridge. Funny how land does that when people leave it alone. By late afternoon, every development stake was gone. The fence was rebuilt along the surveyed boundary. Then I repaired the wooden gate. The holes from Vanessa's sold banner were still visible. Michael offered to replace the damaged boards. "No." "You sure? I want the holes." He understood. I mounted a small steel plaque beneath them. Dawson Creek Ranch Private Land. Title verified. A few days later, Daniel Brooks stopped his pickup beside the gate. He got out and read the sign. Subtle. I thought about something bigger. I bet. He ran his thumb across one of the old bolt holes. Looks better without that sold sign. Behind us, cattle moved through the western pasture. Beyond them, The creek ran through the same corridor Vanessa had tried to control with a forged piece of paper. I thought about how close she'd come. Not because her claim had been true, because she'd made the lie look official enough that people hesitated. That was the part I never forgot. Justice hadn't come from shouting louder than Vanessa. It came from Thomas checking one impossible certification number, Michael finding a restriction written in 1958, Linda opening financial records she had been afraid to question, Greg deciding cooperation mattered more than protecting a bad deal, Claire refusing to confuse suspicion with proof, Rachel making every accusation stand on a document, and Daniel knowing when a county property dispute had become something much larger. The law hadn't moved as quickly as Vanessa's sold sign, but once the evidence caught up, her paperwork couldn't outrun it. Daniel headed back toward his truck. He looked once more at the gate. Looks better without that sold sign. I watched the cattle moving across all 2,400 acres. Wasn't theirs to sell? Daniel drove away. I swung the wooden gate closed behind him. The latch settled into place with one clean metallic sound. No anger, no celebration. Just a boundary where it had always belonged. And this time, everybody knew it.
If Caleb's story leaves us with one lesson, is this: when something important is written, staying calm and keeping good records can matter more than raising your voice. Caleb didn't protect Dawson Creek Ranch by being the loudest man in the room. He kept his desk, tracked the survey, documenting every claim, asked for real court authority, and let people like Rachel, Daniel, Thomas, Michael, and Claire follow the evidence whenever it led. One overlooked certification number, and one of what the agreement ends up mattering more than all the threats make at his gate. There's something worth remembering in that staying your ground doesn't always mean fighting harder. Sometimes it means knowing what belongs to you, knowing why it belongs to you, and having the patience to through it the right way. Justice can move slowly, but dignity gives you something solid to stand on why it catches up. If you believe Caleb handled it the right way, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property line dispute, or a paperwork that didn't seem right, tell us what happened. Your experience may help somebody else recognize the warning signs. And if story about rancher, landowner, and ordinary people quietly standing up for what they work a lifetime to protect means something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more HOA and land trust story ahead, and we'll be glad to help you along for the next one.